Okay, hey everyone, it's Campbell McPherson here, founder of MongoliaTravelAdvice.com, and just going to run you through this quick presentation of everything you need to know before you plan your trip to Mongolia. I hope that by the time you leave this video, you'll have a much better understanding of, what's really important to know, much more than you can get from, your Lonely Planet book or whatever it is. Okay, so first I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to start Mongolia Travel Advice. Basically, I just travelled a lot during my 20s. I've been lucky enough to have spent about 2 years travelling around the world, including about a year in Latin America, quite a bit of time in Africa and West Africa, and a fair bit in Southeast Asia as well. So I have kind of been around the block a bit. And Mongolia is certainly one of my favourite, probably my favourite country, along with probably Colombia and Cuba and Mali, if you're interested. Although Mali, I probably wouldn't advise going to these days unless you want to get your head cut off. Anyway, but yeah, Mongolia, I basically first went there in 2008. I've been back quite a few times since. I met my wife over there in the Golden Gobi Hostel in Ulaanbaatar back in 2008. She's an American. We now live in Melbourne together. But certainly, in running this website, I've got to meet some amazing people, got to learn a lot about Mongolia, and also become quite good friends with some locals and some tour providers who I've met over there, who I'm in touch with on a regular basis. So it's been a fantastic experience for me. And it's pretty much a hobby thing, but it did kind of kick off a career that allowed me to kind of quit my corporate job and work online for a living, which has been great. So anyway, that's enough about me. We'll get on to you and your trip to Mongolia. Just very quickly though, there's a disclaimer here in terms of the information I give you is subject to the disclaimer on the website. That basically being the usual stuff about, can't guarantee the accuracy of the information or the up-to-dateness or whatever, take no liability, blah, blah, blah. You get the picture. But I'll certainly do my best to give you, correct information. Okay, so the big question is, why Mongolia? Why should you consider going to Mongolia over all the other magnificent places that you can visit? First of all, I'd probably say, obviously I'm biased, but as I said, I've been around the block a bit, and I think Mongolia is just a stunning, beautiful place. I mean, it's remote, it's very sparsely populated, the least populated country on the planet, so there's a huge amount of room to move in. It's without a doubt the most scenic place I've ever been to in the world. And, it's largely untouristed. So now, more and more tourists go, but you haven't really missed out on anything. In fact, now I think is a perfect time to go. I used to be jealous of people who went there back in the communist era, during the 80s more. And, they basically said it was a bit of a hellhole, to be honest, and everyone was terribly unfriendly and you couldn't get around anywhere. Whereas now it's got a bit of infrastructure for tourists, but it's such a huge space. And the second you get out of the main capital city, you'll pretty much have it all to yourself, which is fantastic. The other awesome thing, and something that I don't think I've certainly never experienced anywhere else in the world, is complete freedom of travel. And that's just not meaning, military excluded zones and stuff. That's like everywhere. There's no real concept of private land there or private property. So everywhere you can see on this map, you can go to, there's no fences, there's no one stopping you, there's no one's, that river's mine or I own that lake. You can go absolutely anywhere you like. And it's a really wonderful feeling to know that, you're standing somewhere and you're like, I can head in any direction I like, complete and utter freedom. And I don't think you can experience that anywhere else in the world throughout an entire country like that. Even in a big country like Australia, we've got different permits and restrictions and private land everywhere, fences, whereas Mongolia, it's just all yours to explore. It's quite safe. Obviously, you need to take a few precautions, but relative to most other third world countries, certainly, Latin America particularly, but even Asia, Southeast Asia and Africa, you don't have to worry constantly about your own personal security and safety, like you do in a lot of countries that I've been to. And that kind of just helps you enjoy things a bit more, you're happy to go out and camp by yourself, you're not going to get hassled or anything like that. I put in timeless, and that's a bit of, I don't want to use that in a cheesy, cliched way, but it really is, once you get outside the city and, Mongolia is changing, the mining industry, things like that, the city's booming, it's only a matter of time till they get McDonald's and things like that, but out in the country, in the countryside, which is where you should be spending most of your time, things really haven't changed much in a couple of hundred years, and it's just, you really feel like you're in the Wild West sometimes. It's fantastic. And as I said, adventure, just that ability to be able to know you can go anywhere in any direction, plan your own trip. It really does bring back that kind of old world pioneering sense of adventure when you're traveling there. And you see a lot of tourists heading out for the first time, just huge smiles on their faces, just the anticipation of what's ahead. It really is fantastic. It's got a unique culture, obviously. Hopefully you've learnt a little bit about, the nomadic culture and things like that. I mean, many Mongolians are now urban-based, so based in the city or small country capitals, probably the majority. But every summer, they still go out and camp every summer for about 3 or 4 months. So that culture is very, very strong outside the city, and it's a fantastic thing that you will experience very closely. I put here, it's not so much about the sights and the attractions, but the whole experience. And what I mean by that is, it's got mountains, yeah, it's got, alpine lakes, it's got glaciers, it's got, big mountains out west. And they're all, they're all world class, but I think the truth is you probably find better somewhere if you're just looking for a site, like, the best glacier, the best alpine lake, you'll probably find better ones in the Rocky Mountains, Grand Teton National Park or something, but you'll be sharing it with a million other tourists, a year, Mongolia, you'll have these attractions all to yourself, and there's nothing better than, cruising up to a glacier and you're the only person there, within 20 kilometers. I mean, it's just, really, really unheard of in this day and age to have so much beauty all to yourself. So again, it's not so much like the attractions, like, Lonely Planet kind of has these bucket lists of things to see, and sure, some of them are good, but it's more about kind of getting there and just driving around and just, seeing and experiencing the country more than expecting to be completely mind blown by a certain lake or something like that. I hope you kind of get what I'm saying here. Who Mongolia is for, it's for people who really love the outdoors. I'd certainly put myself in that category. You don't have to be, a super kind of outdoorsy adventurer type. You've just got to enjoy nature, I guess, because that's where you really want to be, and that's where Mongolia really stands out. That's the huge appeal of it all. And you have to be open to new cultures and experiences. People have a different way of doing things there. The tourism industry isn't quite as you'd expect, as I'm going to go into. And you kind of just got to have an ability to kind of roll with the punches and be open-minded. Who it's not for. So it's not really for people who dislike the countryside. I mean, sure, you can spend time in Ulaanbaatar, the capital city. I'll talk about that a fair bit soon. But, the upshot is it's a city. It's got stuff. You can have fun there, and, there's interesting things to see. You can make it your home if you want, but it's not really that amazing. The countryside is certainly where it's at. And, obviously the opposite of not being open is someone who's, super demanding, not willing to kind of adjust plans and roll with the punches and accept that they're in a different country, and sometimes their rules apply more than your own. Having said that, some things do suck about Mongolia, and I think it's important just to get them out of the way first, because, often I kind of hate reading like a Lonely Planet and every country is amazing. They'll put Paraguay on the same pedestal as Brazil, and you're kind of sitting there going, well, everything's amazing. What's actually bad? And of course, I maintain Mongolia is a fantastic place to visit, but these aspects really do suck. First and foremost is the food. You can pretty much expect that outside Ulaanbaatar, these days in UB, you can get Eggs Benedict, which is a great bellwether for sophistication and civilization, but out in the countryside it is mutton. And I'll talk about some strategies to kind of look after your own food and cooking and stuff. If you don't have an expensive luxury kind of travel budget, I'd really encourage you to cook by yourself and possibly become a vegetarian, because this constant salty fatty food is kind of horrible. That rank taste of mutton kind of drives you nuts after a while, so you'll start being a vegetarian and eating fish and stuff when you can. The other thing that kind of sucks about Mongolia is the alcoholism. Mongolia's kind of like a lot of indigenous members of like Australia, New Zealand, North America. They're kind of dispossessed, high unemployment. Mongolia's kind of pretty much been colonized by Chinese and then the Russians. So the locals do have this sense of dispossession and a loss of their traditional culture, especially now that many have moved to the city. So there's a lot of basically drunks around, and usually they're harmless old people, but sometimes there's some drunk young men, and that is not nice. I'll talk about that a bit in terms of what you can do to avoid getting in any trouble there, but that's probably the biggest threat to your personal safety. I'm going to talk about safety soon. Attractions, I don't think the attractions suck, but as I was saying, like, if you're going to go to Karakoram, which is on the Lonely Planet, is like this amazing thing, and you expect to be blown away by it, you really won't. It's, as I said, more about just enjoying the experience of getting, it's good to have a destination in mind, but just enjoy I hate to use the word journey, but enjoy the journey while you're kind of getting there to that attraction, and you'll have a fantastic time. But yeah, as I said, some of the mountains and stuff aren't the best in the world, but just being there is. So I don't hesitate to tell you that Mongolia is awesome, even if some of the kind of bucket list items aren't so amazing. Urban Mongolia generally sucks, and by that I mean Ulaanbaatar is fine. Like you can stay there. There's a few museums, definitely worth a few days if you have the time. But it's the country that is so beautiful, and you really need to plan your trips in advance a bit so you get more time out in the country and less time in the city. And then throughout Mongolia, there's these what we call AMAG capitals, AMAG cities. They're not really cities. I mean, you're talking like 10,000 people max in most of these, but they're really drab places to be. I mean, they're good places to maybe find a hotel room, have a shower, get some food, stock up on supplies. But generally, they're pretty drab. drab. There's not much to do. And if you don't plan your trip properly, you can spend a fair bit of time in those places. And probably the worst thing about them is people aren't very friendly. So you may have these notions of, beautiful, happy, smiling nomads. But if you haven't been to Russia, if you've been to Russia, they don't really smile much. And Mongolia is certainly the same. They're bordering on downright rude sometimes in the AMAG capital cities out in the countryside, so don't expect a warm reception. But when you get out in the countryside again, into the gurs or the yurts, the traditional tents they live in, and visit them, then you'll find them some of the warmest people around. So it's like their whole personality changes when they're outside the urban centres. And lastly, the standards of the tourism industry. I'm going to talk about that a fair bit, but you just need to have the expectation that it's a much lower standard than elsewhere. That's largely a symptom of, the Mongolian culture, because, traditionally kind of nomadic warrior people. And part of the beauty is that the culture's being preserved, but it doesn't necessarily translate to first class tourism service. The other symptom is that it's winter 9 months out of the year, or even 10 months out of the year. So tourism industry isn't really a sustainable profession. So I'm going to talk about that in detail later. But yeah, the standards aren't as good as they could be. That's for sure. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about where you might want to go in terms of giving you a general feel for the place. It's, again, sometimes hard to plan things on the lonely planet. I thought I'd just kind of take you through the different geographic regions and basically, show you some pics of each region and kind of see what appeals to you. Okay, I think I can get the mouse here. So this is Ulaanbaatar. You'll probably either be flying in there, or you'll be coming on the train down from Beijing, or up from Beijing, or you'll be coming on the train from Irkutsk, which is on Lake Baikal there. So you'll end up here. Pretty much central Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar. So you've got the center here, wide rolling hills, classic Mongolian steppe. You've got desert. Pretty much the entire southern half of the country is complete desert. Mongolia is a dry country at the best of times, but the south is all pretty much desert. So this is all Gobi Desert. The east is, and I've kind of cut it out there because it wouldn't fit in the slide, but I have never been to the east, and I don't mind saying, I don't plan on going there either. It's just plains. It's high arid plains, and there's a lot of antelope there. Not to say it might not appeal to some people, but it's kind of like, other than maybe fishing the Onon or the Hurlin River there, I couldn't really think of that much to appeal to me. If you've been somewhere like, I don't know, Nebraska or something, you've probably seen it all before. And then you've got the north here, which is pretty much getting into, you're in Siberia here. So that's kind of a bit different, much more wooded, many more trees and much more water around. So the north's a pretty cool area. And the far west is spectacular. I'll talk about that a bit more. So they're basically the different regions, and I'll go through them one by one. Okay, so central Mongolia. As I said, it's kind of this whole area here with the Hungai Mountains. And, it's, as I said, classic rolling hills, kind of dry, green steppe. Really beautiful place to visit. If you've only got a few days to travel in Mongolia, probably 5 days, I'd say, then hang out here would be my advice. It is stunning. So this is where you get these kind of views. Rolling hills, that's in winter time. There's me hiking in central Mongolia. I probably wouldn't recommend that, to be honest. It's just way too open. Perfect to drive across, maybe ride a bike across, but hiking or horseback, it's just a bit too open between features to, really have too much to look at. I enjoy being out in that kind of stuff, but yeah, it's like 10 k's between each mountain. It's a bit much to kind of hike through. There's my wife there. So yeah, it's really, really broad, open, really beautiful, kind of classic Mongolia stuff, and certainly worth experiencing. Definitely by car, I would probably recommend, is the best way to see it, and we'll talk about hiring your own transport. But there's a hiking trip we did through there, and you certainly can. The Hungai Mountains get quite big in certain places, so you certainly can do a hiking trip there. But I'd probably recommend you keep your hiking more to northern Mongolia. As I said, it's a bit more hilly. There's more and more features kind of packed in together because it's more wooden and stuff, so the terrain kind of varies a fair bit quicker than hiking in central Mongolia. So northern Mongolia is where the fishing's at if you're a fisherman, and probably the biggest attraction there is Lake Hovsgol. So you go to the north and pretty much 90% of tourists will go to Lake Hovsgol. It is beautiful, really beautiful, maybe not on par with some of the lakes in North American Rockies, but again, really untouristed. I guess the big appeal of that is, these areas here are really unexplored, unpopulated. You're in Siberian countryside. So if you don't like the look of being around too many tourists, and when I say too many, it's all relative. There's probably only, 10 or 20 max during max season. But if you want an adventure, this whole area here beckons. All you have to do is go a different way around the lake. Or, follow the Egan River down here. So many options to you. And again, you're free to do whatever you want. So wherever you want to go, you can go there, which is cool. By the way, Moron is the AMAG capital here, and I'd really advise you not to spend much time there if you can avoid it at all. It's a real dump. So, you know, buses leave from UB to Murun, and you can get up to Hatgal pretty quickly, but try to avoid staying in Murun. Really not a nice place to be. And again, that goes back to all those endemic problems that I talked about with alcoholism and stuff like that. So the north, you know, I don't know who that idiot is on the horse, obviously me, but the north, you know, trees, there's snow on the mountains there. That was in June, I think. You know, a fair bit more interesting place to go hiking and horse riding and stuff. That's a view of Lake Hovsgol, which is a huge lake. It stretches a long way. Yeah, you can barely see the other side in a lot of places, but, you know, really beautiful place for hiking and stuff. And that's why, you know, it is popular with tourists for a reason. And that's because it's stunning. It's easy to not get lost if you want to go walking and stuff like that. And, you know, it's a really cool place to visit. And, you know, you still get those open Mongolian meadows, beautiful little streams around, a great place for a horse trek or a hike. I would say, if you've got a week in Mongolia or more and you don't want to travel too far out west or anything, I'd edge you towards northern Mongolia. I think it's really stunning. And because there's a bit of a timber around, you don't get as many gers like the traditional tents, but they live in these log cabins. Here I'm camped outside one with some German guys here playing with a family. But it kind of has this Wild West Montana feel, like what Montana must have been like 150 years ago, you know, just real, no fences, log cabins now and again, horses grazing, really, really cool, lovely place to go. You know, big open meadows. And again, there's no car, there's the odd four-wheel drive on a dirt track, but there's no, you know, freeways, fences, private land. It's all yours to experience. It's pretty awesome. Very, very memorable horse ride I did there on the east side of the lake, which is the less visited side. So I'd certainly really highly recommend the north there. Next, we're going to get into the Gobi Desert, and the more popular places around the Gobi are right here, like a bit more interesting here where you're looking at where it meets the Hungai Mountains. And, you know, you've obviously got a bit of, you know, altering terrain here. A lot of the Gobi is just very flat and featureless here. So most of the tours go around this area, and this part of the Gobi is super remote. So if you wanted to have a serious adventure, you go there, but you really need to plan things there, you know, more than one vehicle, all that kind of thing. There's a bit of a monastery that was sacked by communists. You can go on camel rides in the Gobi. Again, you know, if you want to sit on a camel all day in the middle of a desert, go for it. But, you know, it's there. There's some cool attractions in the Gobi too. So this is a trip in May, I think, which is pretty early in the tourist season, so it's still snowing. Camels have got their fur coats on, but a lot of the Gobi is like that. That really appeals to Europeans who have never seen open spaces like that. North Americans and Australians, maybe the Gobi isn't quite as spectacular. It's still great to visit, but maybe the north of Mongolia or central or west Mongolia would appeal more to you. So it kind of depends on your taste. Here we are. There's, you know, a gorge that stays in ice all year. That's the Ice Gorge. There's some big sand dunes in the Gobi too, which are a fair tourist attraction. They're pretty cool. So if you have a mind to do them or ride a camel, you can. Okay, Western Mongolia is, and when I talk about the West, I'm talking really about this pocket here. That's really unvisited here in the Altai Mountains, but here is what we call Bayan Olgi. You may have read about it. That's where the Kazakh enclave is. Kazakhstan's just here, and all the Kazakhs live in Bayan Olgi here, and that is really stunning. If you have the time or the budget to get out west, I would highly, highly, unreservedly recommend it. I really think it's one of the most special places in the world. Not to say the rest of Mongolia isn't, but for me, the West stands out a bit. Really, really spectacular stuff. Again, this stuff here, just, sorry, I'm ranting a bit, but this these lakes here are mentioned in The Lonely Planet as attractions of the West. All this is real desert here, really dry, low. These lakes are windswept, featureless, no redeeming features. So don't go out of your way to see these lakes because they're not really worth seeing. The main appeals of the West are really in the mountains. So in this region here, especially Bayan Olgi, just be aware of that. You know, this is a real desert. I've taken a trip through here to Ulastai from Hovd, and it was super remote. You know, I've had some people email me and say I want to ride a bike through here and stuff, and I'm just like, you have to be insane. You'll die out there. You know, it's all salt water here. There's no fresh water. You know, just be aware of that if you're going to go. But most of the attraction out west is in the far west in Olgi. So there's the glacier. You know, we had that all to ourselves in peak of the tourist season. You know, the Altai Mountain scenery is just kind of lunar in a way. It's just completely otherworldly. There's some pretty lakes out west. Not quite as pretty as Lake Hovsgol, but, you know, cool to ride around. That's what I was saying about the center of the West. Really quite dry and remote. Here we are in a Land Cruiser. But yeah, the Altai Mountains, really stunning, amazing place, really amazing place. My wife and our guide out there, we had a fantastic trip out west. You know, this whole valley, where some of the biggest peaks in Mongolia are, all to yourself, you know, no other tourists around at all. Really fantastic. We did a horse trek there too, so it was all cool. And that's where the Kazakhs live, and they have a special culture. You know, they're actually more Kazakh than Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan got populated by a lot of Germans and Poles and stuff. The Kazakh culture is strongest in the world in Western Mongolia, so you've got the eagle hunters, things like that. There we are, fishing the Hovd River. There's kind of cheesy photo ops there where you can pay a couple of bucks, and you know, your driver pulls up here, hold an eagle, and then you got to pay the guy $5. Eagle hunting takes place in winter, by the way. So when the animals have their fur coats on, when the snow's out, when the animals have their white coats on, that's when the hunters actually use their eagles. The rest of the time it's just tourist photo ops. So if you've got the balls to go out there in winter, then good luck. But and as I said, urban Mongolia, you know, Ulaanbaatar, fine to spend a few days in, lots of museums. You know, I've got a fair bit of information on the website about some museums, nice restaurants. You can get all the good food you want there, which is a real relief after being out in the country. But as far as cities go, you know, in a city you can find everything. Some people love whatever city in the world it is, no matter how much of a hellhole. It's not a hellhole city, but it is just kind of blah, you know, there's nothing hugely amazing about it. I mean, that's what a lot of the kind of squares look like in Ulaanbaatar. That's the kind of slummy district you're getting with the urbanization and stuff. So, you know, interesting to check out. Would I recommend spending a lot of time there? Not really, to be honest. You know, I've spent weeks, months hanging out there for this website and stuff, so it's fine, it's pleasant, but it's not kind of really super memorable. Okay, things to do.